I'm now speaking with Reverend Terry Anderson, candidate at large for Fort Wayne City Council. Terry, I've got to ask you here. When I met you, you were a pastor, and you've been doing it for quite a while.
Yes.
What made you branch out a little bit here and get involved in the political arena?
One thing that's very important to my life, Eric, is that to be able to find ways to give expression to who we are as people of faith. That if we say things like, treat others as we want to be treated, or love your neighbor as you love yourself, we need to put that into play, put that into reality in the public forum. And so I think it's important for us to demonstrate what some of those values of our sacred traditions, and I don't mean only Christianity, but some of those great values of our sacred traditions, values like loving our neighbor, values like justice for all people, values like compassion for all people, respect for all people, need to find ways not only in the public dialogue, but in public policy, to find some very specific ways in which those wonderful concepts can be given life.
If you're able to bring those forward, you'd be on the cutting edge of an intellectual revolution here in America.
Well, I hope that's true. I don't know that that's true, but I think that it's important. In some ways, that probably is cutting edge. In other ways, it's very basic to who we are as human beings. We get so caught up sometimes in the political debate, in social discussions, and those things are important. But sometimes we forget those very basic things about who we are as human people, and our inability to apply those things to real life. I grew up, you may know this, I grew up in Fort Wayne. I grew up in the central city, in the southeast side of Fort Wayne, and eventually in the near north side of Fort Wayne. And so this city is very important to me, and I learned those values growing up in Fort Wayne. I learned what it was to treat other people with respect, to have an appreciation instead of a fear of diversity, and to really treat one another with care and love.
You said a few things there. Having an appreciation for our diversity. Right now there's a movement going where it's a movement for inclusion.
Yes.
All the new groups and everybody like that, and as a matter of fact, a few years ago, I don't know if this is still accurate today, but I'm assuming it is, that Southside High School was one of the most diverse in America.
Yes.
But in this rush for inclusion and putting everybody together and having a group hug, years ago I was part of a multicultural force at IPFW, and when I started talking about issues of Native Americans and blacks, I was almost pushed over into the corner. They didn't want to hear that. And I've noticed that in the whole dialogue of inclusion, we don't want to talk about Native Americans and blacks, and for there to be an inclusion movement, by definition it means that somebody was excluded. And furthermore, just because this might be a council question here coming up, if you don't include what happened in the past and build a model for inclusion today, it has to fall apart because it has no foundation.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. I think that we need to learn from the past. I think we need to have an appreciation for our past, because the past is the thing upon which we build the future. So it's important to find a balance, not to get stuck in the past, but at the same time to understand the past and to use the past as part of our identity and moving forward into the future. And I would address the two specific things that you said in a very specific way. We need to recognize that Fort Wayne has been a diverse community for a long, long time, really since before European settlers came to this community, and we need to appreciate our heritage with our indigenous people, with Native Americans, with American Indians, particularly my Miami Nation, but others as well. And certainly we need to appreciate the role of African Americans in our community, the role of black people in our community. And again, I feel really privileged and honored to have grown up in some of Fort Wayne's earliest integrated neighborhoods. And that helped to shape who I am as a person. It helped me to have an appreciation for those whose skin color was different than my own, whose beliefs were different than my own, whose ancestry was different from my own. And I think that really has helped me as I have lived in this community, as I have assumed some roles of leadership in this community and in community life and religious life, because I feel like I have a connection with people who aren't exactly like I am. And I'm not sure that's true for all of our public leaders in Fort Wayne.
You know, whoa. But you know, to add one more thing to that, which just came to my awareness here recently, as you've been able to grow up and have a clear mind and form friends based on character, you can look back. You know, I don't mean to talk about institutional racism.
Yes.
But boy, is there. I'm talking about the Indiana Constitution. Well, even before that, we had an Indian Removal Act, 1830 by the president, moving all the Indians from across America to Oklahoma, Kansas, that kind of thing. But the Indians weren't moved out of Fort Wayne until 1846.
Yes.
So now they're out of here, got them over in Kansas and everything. 5 years later, in the Indiana Constitution, it basically said no blacks allowed. We're not for slavery, but we don't want the blacks here.
Yes.
It was very clear about that. And even though, here's what I'm getting at, that existed legally.
Yes.
And that has to have some kind of a spillover into the mindset and attitudes of Hoosiers.
Absolutely.
And until that's addressed back that far, it's going to be a certain underlying element of prejudice that will never be eradicated because they don't know where it came from.
Yes. No, I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the things that we need to recognize as we embrace our past is that we have, as a society, as a state, even as a community, as wonderful as Fort Wayne is, and you know that I believe very strongly in this community. I've lived here for many years. But as wonderful as Fort Wayne is, we too have a history of discrimination. We too have a history of excluding people from the process. And it's very important that we recognize that that is part of our history, that's part of our identity, and then we take those values that we believe in, values like justice, values like compassion, and make sure that we don't have laws that are excluding and discriminatory today, and two, use our laws to establish that community of welcome and openness and inclusion of all people, of all race, of all ancestry, of all belief even.
You know, once you get on council, what is the first thing you want to do to change or to add to the present atmosphere?
Well, I think it's very important for council members to take seriously their core responsibilities of, passing and overseeing the laws of the city and passing budgetary matters. But I think that's only the beginning, and I think sometimes our council has been short-sighted in that they have limited themselves to that focus. So one of the first things that I will do is make a suggestion that council meets more often and perhaps in other places to find ways of connecting with the community and being more accessible to the whole community. I can see the possibility of having city council meetings outside of Citizens Square at times in order to engage people and involve them more in the process. And that's one of the first things that I will suggest if I become a member of the Fort Wayne City Council.
You know, I heard that once upon a time that council meetings were indeed held in different high schools.
Yes.
If they did that today, wouldn't that automatically regenerate interest in the whole process?
I think that we need to, I think on a national level, and even here in Fort Wayne, we need to move from leadership that believes they know what is best for people and people need to do what leadership tells them, to a kind of leadership that is more inclusive, more participatory, in which all people can have a say. There are only, by law, a certain number of people who can vote on our community laws, on our city laws. But that doesn't mean that we can't be in constant dialogue and constant participatory relationship with others. And I think the possibility of moving council meetings from place to place is a very practical way to open that up, and is also a very important symbolic way.
You know, right now, Fort Wayne, for the past year, has been sending people to Iowa and to Pluto and all the galaxies to find ideas that they can bring back to Fort Wayne to improve Fort Wayne. You know, what do you think needs to be done? You know, why don't people have a clear idea of what Fort Wayne is or what it stands for?
I think that that's a very good question, and I think one of the reasons is because we have become so fragmented as a community. As we have made this move from a downtown and a central city to further out geographically. That's not a bad thing in itself, but we have lost that kind of internal identity of who we are. And I think we're taking some very significant steps to reestablishing that. I think the development of the downtown and the riverfront is a good thing. I think it's a very good thing to have a very exciting, vibrant core to our community, but I think we can't be limited to that. We also have to recognize that our various neighborhoods have a very unique character to them, and we need to invest in those neighborhoods as a way of broadening our community identity once again. We need to establish business and nonprofit and government relationships that give incentives to businesses and to hire employees within our neighborhoods. So it's wonderful to develop the downtown. I'm a strong supporter of that. But I also think we have to look at what is unique in our neighborhoods and to emphasize those things and establish some quality of life businesses like grocery stores, convenience stores, etc. So people don't have to drive all over the community to get their basic needs met. I think another piece of it when we talk about community identity is recognizing that we have historically been a very compassionate community, but there are also those who are vulnerable in our community, people who are hungry even in Fort Wayne, Indiana, who are homeless in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and we need to make sure that those basic needs are met. I'm not talking about everyone being on an equal basis economically. I think that's probably an impossible dream to pursue. But we have to recognize that our heart as a community is important to everybody, and so we have to respond to those who are in deepest need as we move our whole community forward.
You know, we keep hearing a lot about downtown.
Yes.
And I am totally for developing downtown. And I hear all these great ideas about the riverfront and what they want to bring down there. And it dawned on me while I was asleep the other day, there's one thing that's not being addressed. When you have all this beauty downtown and restaurants here and perhaps a casino or two here and there and all these beautiful places to go, when it rains or when it snows, it's going to be a lake down there. I mean, history shows you that's a flood zone, and ever how sophisticated the engineers are, they can't outmaneuver Mother Nature.
Well, I think that's one question that needs to be addressed, and I think will be addressed in downtown and riverfront development, and that is, you know, it is impossible to have a vibrant downtown with flooding present, and I think there have been some improvements to the sewer system.
Yes.
There have been some improvements to the park system, which enable us to address that issue of flooding, but I think we need to be constantly vigilant of that as a possibility.
Because, not to harp on history, but those rivers have been there for a long time.
They have
since the
been.
glaciers.
Yes.
And when you look at how they flow, how they came, how they flow together here in Fort Wayne, and how they feed into the Maumee, and all that, that's more than just downtown. I mean, it's a whole
Absolutely.
lot of You know, and then the early history of Fort Wayne being basically a swamp.
Yes.
So that's just a swamp. That's real cute.
Well, it's an area that can be a swamp, I suppose, but I think it can be other things
Sure.
as well. And I think, but we need to address that. I think that's one of the things that we need to take seriously, is that we have some history of flooding in this community. And again, I think some of that has been addressed through recent years, but I think it needs to continue to be addressed.
You know, one thing I've noticed, you know, Fort Wayne is a great city, great heritage, great history. Other cities across America, their catastrophes, their great things, whatever it is, they take these things and they market those things.
Yes.
And they use those as an attraction to their area because they have something that nobody else has.
Yes.
Now, Fort Wayne has all these attractions, and it just seems like we just run from it. And case in point, Lakeside, the #3 battle in the history of all the warfare between the Americans and the Indians. #3 in Lakeside,
Yes.
right behind Custer's Last Stand. You know, as a matter of fact, Fort Wayne also has the distinction of having the #1 battle where they killed the most Americans. Not praising killing Americans, but in putting this land here in a perspective, and there's no movies. Why haven't we ever discussed having a movie here commemorating the greatest battles of all time that were fought over this land right here? Nobody has ever suggested a movie.
Well, Eric, I know some of your history as a historian comes out in this question, and I appreciate it. I think that we need to recognize who we are as a people by looking at our history, and then I think we have to emphasize some of those historical elements as we continue to develop and market our community.
Well, you know, sometimes I've had a chance to speak with people, and they feel a little bit uncomfortable with a person from the clergy being on council. What do you say to them to let them know that you're a thinker too?
I think that people who know me in this community know that I have been an active person of faith, but I've also been engaged in this community in a variety of ways, with a lot of community organizations, serving on boards, serving on committees, working with the Urban League, the NAACP, working with our Latino Hispanic community, working with our Asian community. People see me in various ways and involved in various ways in this community. So I wouldn't apologize or hide from the fact that I have been an active person of faith in this community. But what I would want to highlight about that is what I said earlier, and that is the values that I find within my faith, I also see in the experience of people whose faith is different from my own. And there are certainly some differences, but the common values that I see are love and care for one another, a commitment to justice for all people, a respect for all people as children of God, a sense of compassion about who we are, the development of character within people. And I see that as a common element in all of our religious traditions. So when I approach this role as a person of faith, I am really talking about what we see as our common values and our common good. And not religion, not faith in an exclusive kind of way, but faith in an open, welcoming, engaging kind of experience.
How did you become this way? I mean, you just don't automatically just have a love for this ethnic group or justice over here. Were your parents like this or grandparents? Who put that in you?
My parents, when I grew up in Fort Wayne, I grew up in what we would probably call working poor today. We certainly had enough to eat every meal, but we didn't have a lot of new things in our household. We had 5 kids. My dad worked. My mom stayed at home and did not work, as was the tradition of that time. So they were very much like other families in Fort Wayne. The one thing that was different, though, perhaps, is that they always encouraged me to know people who were different than I was. And we grew up in neighborhoods that were more diverse than many neighborhoods in Fort Wayne. We had friends of different traditions, of different racial backgrounds. We were very, I was always taught to see people as people and not people of a certain belief or a certain skin color or a certain background, economically or otherwise. So I do trace that to my parents in large part. But it also comes simply from growing up in some of the wonderful neighborhoods in our community and being fortunate enough to grow up in those neighborhoods that were very much integrated in a variety of ways.
You know, for people who haven't seen you work, you know, what do you want people to know about you that would make them feel that you would be the candidate for them?
I think one of the things that I would want people to know about me is that I try to find a balance between listening and speaking my mind. And I think it's very important to be able to hear what our community is saying and to hear what various segments of our community is saying in its complex and nuanced way. So to hear those voices, because good ideas, new ideas, innovative, creative ideas come out of listening to a variety of people. But I also think it's important for people to know, because sometimes they do see me as that listener in the community. But I think it's also important for people to know that I'm not afraid to speak my own heart and mind. I believe that good decisions are made from people with good hearts and good minds, and I believe that I have a good heart and a good mind. And I think it's important for those people who have those hearts and minds to speak from the values that they hold, and to speak with a strong voice. For those who are vulnerable in our community, those who have been marginalized in our community, and for the larger community as a whole.
You know, here's the last question here. You know, people here on the South Side feel that the South Side has been left out.
Yes.
Everybody's forgotten about the South Side.
Yes.
Growth and development is going on everywhere except here. Since you'll be responsible for the entire city, what would you want to tell the people on the South Side, or what do you want to see happen on the South Side that you can help bring to creation?
Well, first, again, as a child of Southeast Fort Wayne, I would say that I hold this part of the city in great honor and regard. So that's the first thing I would say. But I would also say that Fort Wayne has not always been fair to the South Side of Fort Wayne. People have been left out of the process. People have not been encouraged with incentives from government and from business to develop in the way that they could. One of the ways that I look at the community, and this comes from some of our sacred scriptures in a way, is to see our community as a kind of body. And that when one part of the body is hurting or has been hurt or is weak, we need to build that up. And I think through the historical process, I think the south part of Fort Wayne, the southeast part of Fort Wayne, the central city in some ways, has been left behind to some degree. Not because of the people who live in South Fort Wayne, but because of those of us who may live in other parts of the city, or those of us who are engaged in government or community activities, ignoring those needs and not emphasizing those needs strongly enough. Sometimes I'm troubled when we think too much of Fort Wayne when we talk too much of Fort Wayne as these different quadrants, you know, Southeast Fort Wayne, Southwest Fort Wayne, Northeast, because this is one community. And until we can really move forward economically and in terms of our common values toward a common good and bring the whole community along, we will never be as strong as we can be. So yes, Southeast Fort Wayne, South Fort Wayne, Central Fort Wayne has sometimes been left behind. And we need to make sure that we give people every opportunity to become part of that one community that's moving forward.
You know, I gotta say this here about your commentary. It's so interesting. You know, once all the dust settles after all the elections and everything, yes, it would be great to organize a forum where you and I could talk about some things that you just discussed here, because I'm not seeing. I mean, the candidates are great, mm-hmm, but outside of that, it's been stagnation in Fort Wayne, yes, for 50 years.
Yes.
And that means that everybody's wrong. Otherwise, if they were right, we'd be having more progress that would be visible with evidence.
And for me, that all ties together, Eric. First of all, thank you for that. I think there are some very good candidates this election cycle, and if people don't vote for me, I hope they'll vote for another one of those good candidates. But yes, I think we have to have some new ideas, and we have to be unafraid to pull some of those things out and look at them that we have not looked at before as a community. And what ties that together for me is the thing that we talked about originally. You know, Terry, where are you coming from as a person of faith? How do those values evolve? So, along with looking at budgets, along with looking at the laws of the city, we need to be looking at what the values of the city are. And we need to be looking at what it means to love our neighbors as we love ourselves in a very specific kind of way. And that is to treat all people in all segments of this community with the dignity that they deserve, with the respect that they deserve, with the opportunity that they deserve, with the justice they deserve. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we have ignored some of those things for a long time, and those are the things that I hope that I can bring to public discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric.
And thank you for watching.